That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, honestly, I didn't really want to make this video. I figured it was almost self-explanatory, but the more we had people on Patreon reach out to us, say that they need help setting up Dynasty leagues. They want to know ideal settings. They want to know what to avoid, yada, 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 the whole 9 yards. Figured maybe it's a good idea I could talk about what I don't like in a lot of the Dynasty leagues that people on Patreon send me their team breakdown for. And I'm sitting here saying, you know what, this isn't even really like a Dynasty league. But of course, before we dive into it, please make sure you go down there, drop a like in this video, subscribe to the channel only if you play Dynasty Fantasy Football. If you don't play Dynasty, this video is not for you. This channel is not for you. And also leave a comment letting me know your favorite Dynasty settings, anything that I may have overlooked here. And I think that should be it. Let's go through and let's talk about how to set up your Dynasty Fantasy Football League and also what you should be looking to avoid. We'll mainly get into the voids at the end of the video. But starting off, let's talk about the basics. So if you're going to be looking to join a Dynasty Fantasy Football League, there are a multitude of different ways you can go about this. You can do what I used to do back in 2014, 2015. You could go to Twitter, right? And you could look for some random people on Twitter to try to get in a Dynasty League with. I will tell you this is not ideal for a multitude of reasons. You're going to have to find a damn good commish on Twitter that is going to be able to hold a league together for a long haul, because what usually happens with a lot of those leagues that you'll join on Twitter, I mean, if you find some random people in a group chat, you don't really know them, and you go, you know what, I just want to hop in here. Yeah, it'll be a fun Dynasty League. You can go through, you can play the offseason, you can make a bunch of trades. But then after the first year, you'll have about 3 teams leaving the league, and then you'll play it out one more. Usually the league drops off with activity. And then the second offseason, people are like, what are we doing here? And then they quit. And then all of a sudden you're just looking for a new Dynasty Fantasy Football League. And that's not what Dynasty Fantasy Football is about. I mean, yeah, it's fun to go through and make those trades during the offseason, but it's not about joining a league and then that league folding every 2 years. Now, this is the hard truth of Dynasty Fantasy Football, and this is something that I am trying my best to avoid in our Patreon Dynasty Leagues, where we have implemented strict rules that ensure the longevity of those leagues, and we are going through and updating those rules every offseason, trying to get more and more engagement in those leagues. And of course, we'll talk about that in 1 second. Some other options you could look to join a Dynasty Fantasy Football League would be going into a Discord chat, very similar. I mean, we of course have our Dynasty Discord chat. I mean, you could always find that link in the description of the video. There's like 10, I don't even know how many people are in it. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people are in that Dynasty group chat, and you could easily start a league through there, but you're almost running across the same situation, because I'll tell you right now, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to commish a random Dynasty Fantasy Football League. You are going to have to find someone to commish it, or you're going to put that league together yourself. And usually, like we said, you almost run into the same problem that you have from those Twitter leagues. So that leads us into the best way to start a Dynasty Fantasy Football League. And the best way, and of course, this is not realistic for everybody. I understand, trust me. I mean, my entire life since pretty much 2014 has been Dynasty Fantasy Football. And you know how many friends I have in real life that even know what Dynasty Fantasy Football is? Probably a total of 0 of them. And if I'm being generous, maybe I can say one of them has listened to me when I try to explain it to them before. Maybe one of them has somewhat of an idea what no, it's going to be really hard to find that. I have a lot of people though reaching out to me over there on Patreon telling me, hey, this is a league that I've been in with my friends for 5 or 6 years now. That is the best thing that I could ever hear. I mean, I am jealous of those people. That's going to be ideal. Finding it with people that you know, or I mean, that you've met and you've been interacting with in a group chat for a very long time. There's a difference between going into a Discord chat and jumping at the first league you find with some username that you've never heard of, and jumping into a league with someone that you maybe have been interacting with over the past 3 or 4 months. Now, of course, you could always go over to the Fantasy Flock Network Patreon. I mean, we already run 20 plus Dynasty Leagues. We're about to have a lot of orphan teams you can take over, and we're also going to have Dynasty Startup Drafts throughout the entire offseason you can hop into with our Patreon community. I, of course, will be in those leagues. I'll be the commissioner of those leagues as well, but yada, yada, yada. Now, let's move on to the options for the platform that you have. And one thing that you could do if you go, you know what, Mason? I don't really care. I just want to join a Dynasty League, and I want to make sure that it's 100% going to carry over season to season. You could go over to the FFPC. Now, I will tell you right now, I really don't advise people doing this. And keep in mind, this is not a sponsored video, yada, yada, yada. No, it's not. I'm just being honest here and talking about the positives and negatives with these platforms. With the FFPC, they go out there and they boast that they've never had a Dynasty League to fold, and they run a countless amount of Dynasty Leagues. Now, while that is great, you need to understand the drawbacks with that. If you look at the payout structure that they have, they take 25% of the league pot. The rake is 25%. Now, I don't care how good you are at Dynasty Fantasy Football. For you to be able to overcome that kind of rake and to be able to be a highly profitable player, it is going to be pretty damn difficult. Not to mention that they also have roster cut downs that you have to cut your team down to, I believe it's 14 players every offseason. Keep in mind, I could be wrong with some details here because I don't play there because it costs 25% of the league pot. And you also have to hold a defense and a kicker. So it's like really you're only carrying 12 players. It's almost more like a keeper league. Now there are some other options. Now keep in mind, I started playing Dynasty Fantasy Football back in 2014 and all the way up until 2020, I believe was my first year jumping onto Sleeper. I played on MFL. Now, MFL is a great option for the OG Dynasty Fantasy Football players. If you played Dynasty Football, you really didn't have any options back in 2015, back in 2016. So what you did is you went on myfantasyleague.com. That's where you played your Dynasty League. That's where you hosted it. Now, there are some drawbacks in that as well, and that it costs $60 a year to run a Dynasty League there. Not to mention that the website looks like it was made in probably the week after the internet was created. Like they created the internet, God knows when. And then that next week, some guys had an idea for a Dynasty Fantasy Football website called MFL. They created it, haven't updated it since, and it's been the same since then. Now, of course, it's not ideal to play on a website that looks that old and has that interface, and at the same time, you have to pay $60 for it. Now, there are positives for MFL, and I'll be the first person to admit, if it was just up to me with where I would host our Patreon Dynasty Leagues, I probably would choose MFL. And that's because when you get familiar with it and when you know where everything is and you can navigate it easily, if anything, I kind of like it because it's so customizable. You have literally, it's like a blank page whenever you're creating your league on MFL, and you can go through and you can set up a Devy league where you're having 300 custom players on that format, and you could just do pretty much anything you want. But like we said, the drawbacks are it doesn't look good and it costs money. And then our last option, I'm sorry, not our last option, but an option I wouldn't recommend. I know a lot of people use this as well, and I'll be the first person to admit I look at screenshots based on people sending me their rosters from there, and I've never played on Flea Flicker, but Flea Flicker to me looks like a crappier version of MFL where people used to play on that site back in 2016, 2015, back in the day, because it was free. It was a free, worse version of MFL, but you don't need to play there anymore because you got Sleeper. Sleeper Fantasy is going to be where 99% of people watching this video are going to start their Dynasty Fantasy Football leagues. Keep in mind, this is not a promotional video, but the positives on Sleeper are that it has a new interface. It's mainly driven by their app that you can have on your phone. I prefer to do everything from the computer, so this may be not ideal for me, but also it's free, a much better and much easier experience for the new Dynasty Fantasy Football player compared to MFL. Now, there is a drawback, and that's for me, someone running so many leagues that's already used to MFL. Being a commissioner on Sleeper is a little bit worse because you don't have the same like you can't customize it as much as you would be able to with MFL, and it's a little confusing. That's just for me though, because we're used to playing on MFL for so damn long. But Sleeper is 100% the way of the future. Any Dynasty startup that we are having on Patreon from here on out is all going to be on Sleeper, because I know 99% of the people watching this video, that's what you're going to prefer, and it's free at the same time. And now let's go to the startup draft. And now with the startup draft here, this is of course once you have every owner in your league, and you're going to be drafting 25 plus rounds. If you have a startup draft with less than 25 rounds, I don't know what to tell you. You're not playing Dynasty Fantasy Football. You're playing some hybrid of a keeper league. Really, I mean, I get some people over there on Patreon sending us their teams for us to break them down, and they'll send me a roster that has 6 bench spots. And I'm going, what the hell? A regular Dynasty League, you shouldn't even have anything on the waiver wire. You should not be able to go and just pick up a league-winning running back off the waiver wire any given week. No, that shouldn't be an option to you. You need to be having it with 25 plus rounds, preferably at least 12 teams. Now, going back to what we were talking about with league selection, say if you have a couple buddies in real life that you go, you know what, we can set up a fun league here. We can set up a league that we know is going to be active and be around for a very long time. And there are only 9 other people you're going to play with. So you go, it's either a 10-team league or we take some randoms online. You probably prefer a 10-team league. Just keep it with your friends. But if you're going through and you're creating that through Discord, you're creating that through Twitter, playing in our Patreon leagues, every Patreon league I ever set up will be at the minimum 12-team leagues. I think it's going to be ideal just for the marketplace in your Dynasty Fantasy Football League. And I know a lot of people are probably wondering, well, how the hell are you supposed to get 11 other owners to be able to all agree on a time to draft 25 rounds? Now, there are a couple things you can do to go about this. Now, keep in mind, we have so many people in our Patreon community. So many people want to get in these Patreon leagues that it's a little bit easier for me where I can go through and I can announce a league and I say, hell, this league is drafting on February 15th at 6 p.m. Eastern. Do not message me to get in this league if you are not available at that draft time. It's very easy if you have that many people get in the league. In reality, it's not going to be that case for 99% of people watching this video, whereas you're going to have to do a slow draft. You're going to create a draft, and this is something that frustrates me to no end. You're going to have it about 8 hours. Have the timer 8 hours. Don't rush people. Don't put it on 4 hours where people are auto drafting when they go to bed. Now, this is something that you'll probably experience in your own league, where if you set that for 8 hours and you have an owner taking 6 hours of the clock, there's everybody in the chat going, where the hell is Johnny? How dare Johnny go to work for 6 hours? How dare this man have a life? He needs to come in here. He needs to make his pick right now. Trust me, I was that guy spamming the chat a couple of years ago, but you have to realize that people have a life. You have to realize that, a lot of people are doing this for fun. So please be patient. At this time of the year, we have so much damn time until the season starts. Just have a slow draft. Don't rush anybody. And at the same time, when you have that slow draft, when you have 8 hours on the clock, that's what's going to generate trades, because someone's going to see, hell, Mike Evans is falling. I need to go through and I need to trade up to get Mike Evans in the 6th round here. And then that's way you get that side group chat that you have, and then you're able to go through and start negotiating those trades with picks up on the clock. That's what makes Dynasty Fantasy Football fun. So have it as a slow draft. Don't be rushing people when they're on the clock. And also, I know a lot of people are going to be asking, well, how are we doing rookies? The worst thing, and I repeat, the worst thing that I've ever seen, and I've seen people that I know are Dynasty veterans that have been playing Dynasty as long as I have, and they advocate for this, and I don't understand it. Some people think it's a good idea to just set the rookie draft order as the opposite of what your startup draft order was. So if you pick at the 101 in your startup draft, you get the 112 rookie pick. And if you go through and pick at the 112 in your startup draft, you get the 101 rookie pick. The difference between those rookie picks is massive, to the point where it creates a laughable disadvantage for the people picking at the beginning of a startup draft, where that is the worst way you can allocate those rookie picks. Now, yes, it's the easiest way, but it is by far and away the worst way. And I would not even join a league. Keep in mind, I would not join a league that has that setting. Now, on the other hand, what you're going to do, and by far and away the best way to do this, is you are going to use kickers as rookie placeholders. So when you are in the startup draft, you're not going to be assigned your rookie picks afterwards, because if you're doing a startup draft before the NFL draft, I would advise not to have the rookies in there. And instead, you're going to have those rookie pick placeholders where, say you're selecting at the 211 in your startup draft. You're the 11th pick in the 2nd round, and you go, you know what? I really want to get Breece Hall. I really want to get a rookie here. Instead of going through and selecting Breece Hall, you're going to just take the kicker that's available. You're going to take that first kicker off the board, and then after the startup draft, the commissioner's going to go through and he's going to enter in that you have the 101. And it's going to be that way throughout the entire draft. So if you go, you know what? I kind of want to take a shot on Drake London. I wonder if I can get Drake London at the 105 in our rookie draft. Then maybe at the beginning of the 4th round in your startup draft, you're going to go through and you're going to take the 5th kicker off the board, which will then indicate that you have the 5th pick in the rookie draft, and they will go through and they will manually assign that to you after the draft. If you need to look that up, I'm sure you can figure it out, but please just use those kickers as placeholders. Do not automatically assign people rookie picks. That's a horrible way to go about it. And then also, in terms of the starting lineup requirements and the scoring, one thing that I really with some dynasty leagues that I get sent is seeing a shallow starting lineup. I mean, seeing someone send me, okay, we start 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 receivers, a tight end, and a flex. I'm going, what the? No, a player like Rondale Moore is never going to matter in that format. If you want to make Dynasty Fantasy Football fun, you need to make sure that those depth wide receivers, guys like Rashad Bateman, guys like Rondale Moore from last year's draft class, that you better be hitting on those players. You better know the right guy to take. You better know to avoid Terrace Marshall, and you better reward the owners who are able to do that accurately. And how you do that is you expand the starting lineup. You add in multiple flex spots. That way those players like Elijah Moore, all of a sudden, if they're your wide receiver 5, you're starting them on a week-to-week basis. So at the minimum in a Dynasty Fantasy Football League, you need to start 10 players. Now, keep in mind, if you join a Flock Patreon Dynasty League, we're at the minimum going to be starting 11, just because I like to go a little bit deeper. I played in leagues before where it's a 14-team league and you're starting 12 guys. Like, do you know the pain of having to go through and start O.J. Howard every single week? That's what Dynasty Fantasy Football is about. And of course, it has to be Superflex. If you don't know what Superflex is, it's the ability to start a second quarterback. I mean, the perfect example of this is in a Superflex league last offseason. You better know to listen to the Fantasy Flock Network and avoid Justin Fields and instead draft Trey Lance. You better know that. You better get rewarded for avoiding Zach Wilson and instead taking Mac Jones a little bit later on. Because, I mean, if it's a 1 quarterback league, you going through and hitting on Mac Jones or you missing on Zach Wilson, it doesn't move the needle at all. Your team really hasn't changed. But if it was a super flex league, the core foundation of your team has changed. And that's what Dynasty is about, making those decisions important. And now, in terms of the scoring, of course, throw on PPR. Everybody should be playing a PPR format. But what's most important in the Dynasty Fantasy Football League is you got to make it tight end premium. You have to make it where the team that decided to take Pat Frymuth now has an option that they can go through and they can play Pat Frymuth in the flex spot if they want. Please make it tight end premium. Whether you want to start 2 tight ends, that's going to really jack up tight end value. Or if you just want to make it a simple 1.5 points per reception for the tight end position, that's more than enough as well. Of course, you can do some other settings. You can have it points per carry. You can have it tiered PPR. I mean, if anything, I think tiered PPR is probably the way to go about it, by giving the running back half a point per reception, wide receiver position a full point per reception, and the tight end position a 1.5 points per reception. If you're playing a points per carry format, I used to like playing with them back in 2015 because people really didn't understand that. Hell, I mean, you want to have a running back in your flex spot every single week. You go into the startup draft and you just take running back after running back after running back after running back after running back. I don't necessarily like points per carry leagues now just because it really does skew everything. Now, the most important thing is going to be talking about how we're collecting league dues. Now, you can do this a multitude of different ways. I don't necessarily want to advise anybody doing this on Venmo or PayPal. If you want to make sure that everything's transparent and you don't trust your commissioner, just do it on LeagueSafe. LeagueSafe is going to take a fee, which is a pain in the ass, of course, but you're at least going to be able to see where the money is. Now, beyond that, what you need to be doing is you need to take a deposit for the following season. So right now, if you're starting a Dynasty League in 2022, this is how I run all the Flock Patreon Dynasty Leagues. Is last year, we had $60 for the yearly dues, and we required a $30 deposit for the next season. So then you had to pay $90 to get into the league. $60 went to 2021, and that $30 was going over to 2022. So now at this point, if someone wants to leave a Flock Patreon Dynasty League, they're going to have to forfeit that $30 that they deposited. That way it's easier for us to go through and convince someone to take over that team because they're going to be getting a $30 discount. Now, I would advise to go a step beyond that. If you are going to be trading future draft picks, and I know everybody wants to trade future draft picks, of course, that's what makes Dynasty Fantasy Football very fun, but also that usually leads to, a wide gap between rosters, and sometimes that's what can ruin the league. I would advise that if anybody trades a future pick, before they are able to do that, they have to pay that year in full. If you want to go through, trade a pick in 2024, that's great. But you better be going through and paying your dues for 2024 as well. Because if you go trade that pick, and I've seen this time and time again, I break down people's dynasty teams every single day on Patreon. I see the people sending me their roster. I'm like, how the hell did this get this bad? And we check, and they went through and they traded a first-round pick 2 years ago. They traded their 2022 first last offseason to get Chris Carson. I'm sitting here, okay, this is horrible. This may not be salvageable. And you want to make sure that owner sticks around, because if that owner then leaves, how are you convincing someone else to come in? And if nobody's willing to take that team, then the league is dead. It's that simple. So I would say that if you're trading future picks, you need that owner to pay in full for that season that they traded. And also, you need to be setting a small portion of every year, just a small portion aside for people coming in and taking over rosters. Like, we're setting over $20 every year in those Flock Patreon Dynasty leagues in case, we have a bunch of people leave and we need to go through and have some extra money to convince someone to take over a bad team. That way we can make sure that those leagues keep on chugging along. I think that should be it. I hope I didn't miss anything. This was my first time making one of these videos talking about how to commission Dynasty Fantasy Football League. Please let me know if this helped. Let me know if this was garbage. Go to the comment section. Let me know if you have any other questions. I think that should be it. Drop a like in the video, subscribe, go join the Flock and Patreon, and have a great day.